Welcome back to the channel, everybody. Next up is the P38 Lightning egg plane, and this is for the group build being held by Dan the Man, Munchkin Modeling Man 72, and Charlie Mack. Inside the box comes 4 runners, decals, instruction sheet, and the canopy. Let's jump right into this build. We're going to start clipping off the main body, then we're going to snip off the little nubs that are left behind, and we're going to end up sanding these guys off to make everything nice and smooth. This way we could get a good fit when we start mating up parts. I'm going to start taking off more parts for dry fitting on the bottom of the wings. This way we could get them cleaned up, get all those nubs off of there, dry fit them, glue them in place, and make sure everything looks good. I'm starting to glue the bottom wing halves together. We're going to use Tamiya extra thin cement, just running a bead down the front end of the wing and also on the bottom, squeezing together and letting it sit for a few seconds and then let it dry on its own. And then we're going to go into taking off the bottom half of the ship itself, the egg. Again, doing cleanup. This way, once we're done cleaning up, sanding and everything, we can dry fit it together, see how it comes out, and make sure that we have a very good fit and try to reduce any seam lines there may be. Time to test fit both half of the eggs. Once we put them together, there is a seam there, so what I'm going to do is going to take my Plastruct Bondine. I'm going to run a bead around the whole seam. I love this product. It makes a nice bead of plastic that you can sand down very easily once it's dry, and it makes a very strong bond. Once it's dry, I start clean up with my sanding sticks. I start with a coarse, and then I move over to a medium sanding stick to get rid of all of the scratch marks there. Usually going with a medium is pretty good, but sometimes I have to go down to the fine and the extra fine. I'm not going to be using the drop tanks on this build, so we're going to fill them in with some Bondo. I'm going really heavy on the Bondo here to try to press it all the way in and down to the bottom. The bad part about this is when you use this much Bondo, it does shrink and takes a little longer to dry. I will scrape off most of the sides there on both sides, just so I don't have that much sanding when I'm done, and we should be good to go. I'm going to start working on the nacelle halves. As usual, we're going to clip them off, we're going to take our sanding sticks, get those nubs off, get everything nice and clean, and then we're going to put them together just to test fit them and see what we have going on with these parts. I can tell you this much, they are going to have a little gap issue once we get to that point. I was actually surprised with how many issues this kit has gap-wise and flash-wise. Right here, I'm working on the tail section. There's a big piece of flash on the back there. So I started up by putting on some extra thin Tamiya cement, squeezing the parts together, letting that glue do what it has to do, and sealing the sides in. And then I'm going to work my way down the nacelle, just putting a bead of Tamiya extra thin down there, squeezing it together, letting it do its job again, getting it all dried up, and then we're going to start working on the sanding of these parts. Next up, I'm going to clip off the wheel wells or the wheel bays. I'm not sure which way you would call it. It's a simple part. It's a very plain part. Just clip them off, get the nubs off the side there, and then we can work on test fitting these pieces in, getting them glued in. This way we can start doing the sub-assemblies of the ship. Getting back to cleaning up the front seam here, I want to get it cleaned up as best as possible before I put the wheel well in there or the wheel bay in there. This way it doesn't get in the way of my sanding stick, and then we can move on. Now I'm just popping the wheel bay in there, nice and simple, fits nice, just running a bead of Tamiya extra thin down both sides to lock it in place, let it dry, and we're good to go on this piece. These are little intakes for the side of the nacelle. I decided to take out my little needle file here. It was easier to take the soft plastic off, and there's a little piece of flash inside that I just used the nib to get out, and we got a perfect piece. Placing that piece on the side of the aircraft, just making sure it fits and hitting it with a little extra thin, letting it sit, and we're good to go again. As I thought, the Bondo shrunk, so we're just adding a little more Bondo. Once that's dry, we'll flatten it out and it'll be nice and smooth. Next up, these are the front ends of the nacelles. This is for the bottom half. We're going to take them off, clean them up. When I'm test fitting them, unfortunately one side fits very well and the next side overhangs. So I had to make a choice of which side I wanted to overhang to get to it better. Just gluing it on, again, extra thin cement, keeping it in place, letting the glue dry, and then we're going to start working on sanding this thing. I'm trying to get the seams down as best I can, and I'll show you here in a second with my thumbnail that there is a huge lip on this thing that we're going to have to take down, and I'm going to use my needle files because this plastic is very soft, but sometimes I do get a little aggressive with it. You kind of got to be very easy with the needle files, and then I'll use my sanding sticks to take that down, either with the coarse or like I am here with the medium. And like I said before, sometimes I have to go back to my fine and extra fine to get those marks out of the plastic itself. And here's that lip I was talking about. You can see how big it is. That is going to have to be worked down with the needle file. Here I'm taking off the tail piece, of course. Here we go again, sanding the pieces down. This way we can make them fit in there and fit nicely without getting caught up, because we have to put this through the tail end of the aircraft. One side of the aircraft here fits nice and snug. I had no problems with it, lined it up pretty well. The second half that I'm going to put on right now, this one slid straight down, so I had to kind of line it up. There are markings on the tail, making it even on both sides of the aircraft, which wasn't too difficult to do. Once I was done doing that, then we just got out the extra thin cement and I started cementing it top to bottom or bottom to top, both on the inside and the outside of the tail. This way it would stay in place. A little bit of this goes a long way. Once it's dried, the piece was in there and it wasn't going anywhere. Now this is the front wheel bay. There's no real bay up front, but this had a huge piece of flash on it. I didn't go with sanding sticks right away. I just took my X-Acto knife and I was cutting off the flash. And then once I had that piece of flash off, I took my sanding stick, I smoothed it down just to make sure that it was nice and flat. The legs to the landing bay are a little bit on the skinny side, and there's a little gap where you place them in. When I put the Tamiya extra thin cement on there, I actually had to hold it for a while just to make sure that it settled in and stayed locked in place. This was the not so fun part of the build. The two nacelle halves weren't mating up very well with the top egg half. I kind of had to pull apart the nacelles like front to back. This way I could slip them in there and get them locked in. It took me like a good 3-4 tries, as you can see me fumbling with it right now. And then eventually I was like, you know what, let me try to pull these apart a little bit like I am, and then I'll snap them in there. And once I do snap them in, you'll see there is some gap issues where they meet up, and this is going to take a lot of sanding and a lot of glue work just to get it to look good. Working on gluing both halves together, once I do get the glue on there, I do have to kind of shift the pieces into place to mate them up the best I can with the minimal amount of lip. Now I'm just working my way around the ship. I'm hitting it with Tamiya extra thin cement, and I'm going to hold those pieces together, hoping for a good bond and squeezing a little bit of that plastic out to get rid of the seam, and then we'll just sand it down and have it clean. But it always doesn't work out the way we want it to. If you do get this kit, just beware where the wings meet the fuselage in the back. Both corners tend to pop up, so I had to rework this corner a bunch of times and squeeze it really tight and pretty much clamp it to hold those corners down and get them looking semi-decent. I really didn't think a small kit like this would have a few issues that it does. Now I'm working on the other side of the plane, the other nacelle half. It isn't as bad as the other side. It didn't really have that lip. A small one, but not as big as the other side. So just squeezing it, hoping to get rid of that seam with the plastic melting and pushing some up, and then we're going to sand it down as we've been doing. And now I'm working on all of the seam work, and it's a little tough with the shapes, so I had to go over to just regular sandpaper. This way I could get in there with my fingers instead of a sanding stick. It made it much easier to work on the seams. Tons and tons of seam work on this kit, my friends. So if you don't like seam work and you don't like sanding, I probably wouldn't buy this kit, but it's really not that bad after all. It's a small kit. You do have to do some work just to get rid of those seams and make it look smooth. Now we're pretty much to the end of the full build process before painting. These are the struts for the wheels. They do have seam work down them, or I should say mold lines down the sides of all of them. So I had to clean all those up, get them nice and pretty. And then once I got all of the seams off of them, all I did was test fit them onto the wheel. Unfortunately, they're not going to spin because I do have to glue them in to keep them steady. I just drop a little dab of glue in there, and then I will put the strut inside the wheel, put it to the side, and then let that one dry, and then I'll move on to the other wheels, the back wheels. And the same thing goes with the back wheels. We're going to be working on the struts for those, getting the seam lines off of them, popping a little glue into each one, and then letting them set to the side. Some of these wheels did have a nice mold line down. It wasn't too bad getting them off. I didn't flatten anything out, which was nice, but they came out decent in the end. And that's it. Pretty much all the major construction is done. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you come check out the next one when we start painting.